All right. Then we can move to one of our other scholars. So this fellow is another Arabic scholar. He's a little bit later on, so he lives about 100 years after Fatima al-Fihri. He is born in Basra, which is in modern-day Iraq. But a lot of his work happens in Egypt. So the Middle East, North Africa, this area is all sort of an Islamic area. In his native Iraq, he's a vizier. He's fairly important. So, he's a vizier. He is an incredible mathematician. He's a physicist. He's an astronomer. And boy, does he have a truly heinous case of hubris. Hubris is the word for excessive pride. You see, this fellow believed that he was so awesome at everything that he could dam the Nile.
What?
What does that mean?
Yeah.
Somebody not naming names told me about this.
Ooh.
The Nile River. You know how beavers.
And you might know how this is going to
Like
go.
Yes.
So,
was he just like full of himself, basically?
he was a great scholar. There's a lot of important things he did. Don't worry, we'll talk about a lot of the important things he did. But he definitely thought he could do something that he absolutely could not do. So if you know much about Egyptian history, you know that part of why Egypt has been like such a nexus of civilization is the Nile River. Because every year the Nile River floods. And when the river floods, it takes with it a bunch of like fresh dirt and sediment, including a lot of nutrients and things that make the ground fertile and easy to grow crops in, and it deposits it on the land. So because the Nile floods annually, the soil there is perpetually fertile, right? It doesn't get worn out. So it's a really good area for agriculture, so it's easy to feed a big population. Once you have a big population, then you can have people start to specialize, and you can start doing like really interesting and exciting things. But as this culture begins to thrive more and more and more, and we start seeing more permanent settlements and bigger buildings and things, suddenly this annual flooding of the Nile becomes a bit of a problem because you can't control how big the floods are. And sometimes, you know, they're just big enough to give us new, fresh soil and then recede, and other times they're so big that they're destroying people's homes and wrecking infrastructure and making it really hard to take on big, exciting projects. So the Caliph who's in charge of Egypt at this point in time, he hears that there's this guy in Iraq who says he can dam the Nile. And the Caliph says, awesome. That would solve so many of our problems. Come down here. I'm going to fund you. You're going to start a massive public works project. You are going to dam the Nile. He did not dam the Nile. He gets down there, sees how big the river actually is, and goes, oh, I'm in danger. Because the thing about this Caliph is he has a bit of a reputation. Whenever somebody crosses this guy, whenever somebody fails him, there is a tendency for this Caliph to behead them or exile them or otherwise ruin their lives. He's known to be extremely short-tempered. There are stories about him like banishing a goat once.
What?
Yeah, you don't think a goat needs to be banished, but the goat must have been really obnoxious. So Hassan al-Haytham is really, really worried. He is afraid that if he says, I can't do it, if he tells the truth, he's going to be executed. So he comes up with a neat, tiny little plan with absolutely zero drawbacks for how he's going to get away with this, which is, Naya knows, what's he do?
He pretends he's insane and then locks himself in his house for 10 years and doesn't come out.
He pretends he's insane, locks himself in his house for 10 years, and does not come out. Very nice, 100% correct. That's the plan, right? He just plain insanity, right? It's your fault for listening to a madman saying that he could dam the Nile. Obviously, this was never serious. I'm just crazy. Please don't kill me. So he disappears into his house for literally a decade until the Caliph dies. He doesn't come out. But he's still a great scientist. He's still a great scholar. And in that period of house arrest, he does some of his most amazing work. I want to talk a bit about his philosophy for how you do work, because it is very, very different from the natural philosophy that we talked about the Greeks do. In natural philosophy, you make observations and then you leap directly to your conclusions and then you defend your conclusions to others. What Hassan Ibn al-Haytham says is no. When you believe something, you have to make yourself an enemy of that. If you think something might be the case, you have to go out and you have to attack your own idea. He has this quote that talks about make yourself an enemy of all you read.
So he's the originator of the scientific method.
He's the originator of the scientific method. This is the guy that it comes from. So when he thinks something is the cause of something interesting, what he will do is he'll say, okay, here's what I think is happening. I have a hypothesis. So we have the beginnings of this concept of testable hypothesis, of testable hypotheses. But it's not enough to just like have a hypothesis. You have to set out to disprove it by running an experiment that could prove you wrong. And then you run that experiment, and that's how you'll get data from it, you'll analyze the data, that's how you'll know if you're correct or not. Not only does he do experiments, he does really good experiments that use things like control groups and test groups. So a control group is when you have like one thing that you don't change, you don't do anything to, so it's like a point of comparison, while a test group is the thing that you are actively changing. So in this period of 10 years of being under house arrest, he comes up with the scientific method. We're going to talk about some of the work he did when he was there and what his specific experiments were. But I just want to give you a sense. So this is the Nile River as it stands today. This is a satellite image. In the 1950s, they finally started the project of the Al Answer Dam. So they did actually eventually build the same dam that he set out to build, but it took 1,000 years to finish. So this is the dam that ended up being built, which does regulate the flow of the Nile and control how fast we're going to get floods and when we're going to get them. And it wasn't completed until 1970. So it took a long, long time for them to actually succeed. But I want you to know, like, this was genuinely an important public works project. It just wasn't feasible at the time. All right, so let's talk about his experiments. He's stuck in his house, under house arrest, for literally a decade. So he's in his tiny little house, and there is a little break in the wall somewhere, where just a point of light can come through. And when this happens, he notices something really interesting. There's like a hole in the wall on one side of his house. On the back wall, opposite it, he sees a projected image of the city outside. But everything is flipped upside down. You can build one of these. It's called a camera obscura. Very easy to build. It just requires a dark box with a little hole that light can come in, and you can see an image projected on the back. Yes, Jacob?
I made one before.
You've made one. How'd it go?
It went pretty well. It was like maybe I think it was in second grade.
In second grade, yeah. Was everything flipped upside down when you looked at it?
Everything was flipped upside down.
Everything is flipped upside down. Now, when he sees this, he goes, hold on, something doesn't make sense. Why would I see this? Why would I see it flipped upside down? Because at the time, the prevailing view about how vision works is an idea that comes from the ancient Greeks. And it's that we see because there are laser beams that basically come out of our eyes, and the laser beams coming out of our eyes hit objects, and that's how we see them. So the idea is that vision is like a thing that comes from us and hits objects, and that's how we see them. Yes.
What's this machine called? Or this
It's called a camera obscura. So camera, like the word camera. Obscura, like the word obscure, but replace the E on the end with an E. It's the tech, obscura.
So
O-B-S-C-U-R-A. Camera obscura. It's the technology that is behind how cameras work, right? It's the technology that's behind how like a film projector would work, right? This is a pretty critical technology. So what he says is, this doesn't make sense with what we've been told about how vision works, right? So the way we've been told that vision works must be wrong. And he comes up with a hypothesis for what's happening. What he thinks is happening is he thinks light must travel in a straight line. And so he comes up with an experiment to test it. Let me explain why he thinks light travels in a straight line. So, if light travels in a straight line, then light bouncing off of, like, say, the peak of the spire would travel in a straight line through the hole in his wall, and when it hits the back wall, that top of the spire, right, light would have bounced to the very bottom of his room. And light from down here, if it's moving in a straight line through that hole, would have to end up here. So he thinks the reason why everything is flipped is because light is traveling in a straight line. And he sets out to prove this with an experiment. Because again, we're seeing the beginnings of the scientific method. That's guiding point number 4. This how do we do science. His experiment is, okay, outside my house, we're going to set up 3 lanterns. So he sets up 3 lanterns outside his house. Inside his house, on the projection, he sees 3 lights. Now what he says is, okay, if I turn off the lantern on the left and light travels in a straight line through the hole in my house, then the light from that one would go through the hole. It should extinguish the projection that in his house is on the right. And that's exactly what happens. If he turns out this lantern, then in his house, this one goes off. And if outside he turns off the lantern that's on the right, then in his house, the one that's on the left goes off. Because the light is traveling in a straight line through that hole in his wall. He does a bunch of experiments. As he's doing this work, he ends up experimenting with things like how big the hole is. He proves that light travels in a straight line. He ends up writing an entire book on optics. Yes.
It looks like from the picture that light travels in like a diagonal line.
That's just the picture. It's just the art. The light travels in a straight line. So from here to here, from here to here. So like these upper windows here, if we go in a straight line through the hole, you can see we get the upper windows here. The spire, the top of the spire, straight line to the top of the spire. Yeah. All right. So he writes this book on optics. As part of it, he talks a lot about the scientific method. Now, when I was a kid, and I was in middle school, and I learned about the scientific method, I was told that the scientific method was invented by a guy named Francis Bacon, who was a European. But it turns out that Francis Bacon had a Latin translation of Ibn al-Haytham's book. He's not the person who invented the scientific method, he's just the person who brought the scientific method to Europe. Right? So the thing I was taught wasn't accurate, right? We were like, oh, this guy spread it.
What's his name again?
The European?
Yeah.
Or Francis Bacon. Bacon like the food. Yeah.
Bro, imagine going with that last name to middle school.
But of course, the actual origin was Islamic studies. Eventually, his book is translated into Latin, and then it becomes more, which is more the language of scholarship in Europe. And then we start seeing this idea make its way into European.
So would that count as scientists building on their predecessors' work, or is that just spreading it?
Absolutely. In particular, like, I would say the idea of a language of scholarship. You could probably write a whole essay with things that I talk about in these lecture series about the importance of language. Like, if you wanted to write an essay about the importance of language learning in the spread of scientific knowledge, you could absolutely do that and pull loads of examples from the things I talk about how important that is. Yes, nice.
Is this entire thing supposed to represent guiding question number 5? Because like his mistake to like dam the Nile turned into this.
Yeah, you could use that as a piece of evidence for number 5 for sure. If you wanted to talk about, let's see, so building on our predecessors' work, the idea of a scholastic language enables that. If you wanted to talk about mistakes, we have this big mistake with an attempt to dam the Nile, which does lead to all of his work in optics while he's under house arrest. There's a ton here about identity. Who has examples of identity and how that has come into play here? Ryan?
How he was that, or like he thought that he was the best, so he could win the Nile, and then
You could probably talk about hubris as a core part of his identity, yeah? What are other ways that identity has shown up in today's lesson? Emily? Never mind her. Okay. Joaquin?
Fatima Al-Fidi, when she's like rich so she can fund the thing, but like someone who doesn't have a lot of wealth probably wouldn't be able to fund it.
Yeah, so we have people like Fatima Al-Firi who are building the schools, but I will note, this is the first, like, not rich person that we've had in this lecture series. Even though Haytham was not rich, you no longer, at least in this period of time, right? Progress is not, a single arrow that points forward. But during this period of time, you don't have to be rich to be a scholar, right? Because education is considered important for everyone. So there's an aspect of identity. For a brief period of time, your identity is a little bit less important. Audrey?
Another part of identity that shows up is like a strange way of getting out of getting in trouble.
Talia?
I was just sort of going to say what you said about how identity wasn't super important anymore because you didn't have to be a certain gender or a certain like wealth level or religion or anything.
Yeah. It doesn't matter if you're Jewish living in Morocco, you can get an incredible education at this university. It doesn't matter if you're Catholic living in Morocco, you can get an incredible education at this university, right? If you're a scholar, like you can find a scholar to take you in as their subject, as their pupil, and right? It doesn't necessarily matter what your gender is or what your religion is. Joaquin?
The note about Arabic becoming a scholastic work, would that fit under 4?
Yeah, you could absolutely use that as evidence for number 4, you could use it as evidence number 3. The concept of a language that is used for scholarship is really important in a lot of different ways. So for some of these things, a single note might be relevant to more than one guiding question, right? There's many essays you might write that might include that tidbit about Arabic as a language of scholarship.
Oh wait, Anna.
Yes, sure.
From yesterday, the number 8 would work for the atoms, right?
Yesterday we didn't have experiments yet,
Okay.
so we couldn't use number 8 for that, but you could use number 1, talking about the model of the atom. Yesterday. All right. One last point I want to make. There is a tendency people have to think about progress as a straight line. To imagine that in the past the world was bad, and in the present the world is okay, and in the future the world will be better. And that's not really how things work. There is a lovely quote that many of us have heard from MLK, although he got it from Gandhi and Gandhi got it from somebody else, whose name I sadly don't remember, that says, "The moral arc of the universe is long, but it bends towards justice." And I hate to say it, I actually really strongly disagree with Dr. King here, because I don't think the arc of the universe bends towards justice. I think that people, individuals, reach out, they grab the moral arc of the universe, and they yank it towards justice. I think that justice is a thing that we build, that we make. There are times in history that were really good and peaceful. There are times in history that are really bad. And whether or not we're in a period of peace and prosperity or war and destruction depends on the actions of individuals. People create those scenarios. Yes, Chef?
What would happen if you like moved the box like up to like the same level as the top of the thing? Then that light would be going straight.
Yeah.
And then the other one would be going straight up. So what would it look like?
If this were scooted higher,
Yeah.
if this was going straight through the hole, you would see it straight back, right? And then this step would probably be, it might be out of view of the top of the thing, but it would be even higher.
It might be on my roof.
Yeah.
What if, like I'm just like kind of like adding on. What if you're like way higher, like 2 times the height of the tower up in the box, and then would you see it right side up, or would you not be able to
It's still going to be upside down. Yeah. So like here, right, if he's up on a hill, this is still going to be at the bottom compared to this. It's just like the angles of things might change a little bit, but you're still going to see things be flipped. Yes? Yes. One of the thoughts that I want to make sure that you leave today with is that you're not going to necessarily have a super tidy story of history where we get to start with like, oh, in the very beginnings, it's only the rich dudes. And then we have, maybe it opens up a little bit to class, and then maybe it opens up a little bit to this. Things are going to move up and down, right? Things were better for women scholars in the Middle East in the year 900 than they might have been hundreds of years later in Europe. Right? Eventually, this idea of the university does make its way to Europe, and we begin seeing the great universities of Europe founded, places like Cambridge and Oxford. And those universities aren't going to accept women for a long, long time. So just because time has passed does not mean that progress moves forward with it, right? Progress is a thing that people are continuously creating. It comes from people's values. It comes from people's decisions to reach out, grab the world, and make it better. And it is my dearest hope for all of you that you will grow up to be people who believe that you have the agency, the power, and the ability to grab the moral arc of the universe and bend it towards justice. I want you to grow up to be people who believe that the world can be better and to believe that you have the ability to help make it better. Don't ever let yourself fall into the trap of thinking things will automatically just get better and I don't have to do anything, or things will automatically just get worse. I know that doomerism is more of a thing with y'all's generation nowadays. Neither of them is correct. The future will be what we make of it, and you do have the ability to influence that future. And on that note, that's all I have for you today.